When you talk about wills, when you talk about trust, that means you're going to die. But we're all going to die. One of the biggest misunderstandings that I see is that people think that everything is going to be all right. They don't have to do anything. Or I get, well, my children will know what to do. I always start out by saying that while you're going celebrating life, they're going to be fighting in the middle of the street. The goal is planning ahead. Sometimes it's never going to turn out the way everybody wants it to turn out. One of the roughest challenges that I see is when families have to go against each other. You got to be sure that however you prepare, not just wills, but even deeds. I had a case recently where somebody came to me and I asked them this question.
Welcome back to our series of videos aimed to educate our community about different issues related to housing. My name again is Abraham Reyes Pardo. I'm the Vice President of Housing at the Urban League of Greater Philadelphia. The Urban League is a 108-year-old civil rights organization. Today, I have the great pleasure to reconnect with an old friend,
Yes.
I'll get into that in a second, the great Reverend Edward Sparkman, who also is very involved with NeighborWorks America as a trainer for NeighborWorks America. We were just talking about how earlier this year, you were in Philadelphia, You just came back from New Orleans,
Yes.
going to Chicago next year, and all of the above, right?
Yes.
Welcome to our podcast.
Good.
Thank you so much
Good.
for
Thank
agreeing
you.
to be
Thank
here
you for
with us.
Yes.
When I said, I was just telling you that every time I look at you, I think about Abraham 15 years ago, a 25-year-old Abraham. Didn't mean to date myself, but I just did.
That's all right.
You've been doing this great work for much longer than some of us have. And that's why it was so important for me to have you included as part of this very important conversation about an issue that is affecting and impacting our communities in many ways. I'm glad to hear you briefly mentioned that you have been on the road and deep in the community, partnering with different elected officials, talking about this relevant and important issue of estate planning, tangled titles, heirs property, and all of the above. For those of you who were curious about this video and your curiosity brought you to this content, let me give you a little bit of context of the issue that is affecting Philadelphia. According to a study published by the Pew Charitable Trust in 2021, in Philadelphia, there might be somewhere around 10,000 tangled titles. And we'll get into the definition of that in a little bit. It's an issue that disproportionately affects Black and brown families. There's a reason for that as well. I'm sure we'll touch on that. It's a costly issue. According to the research conducted by Pew, it costs around $9,000 in fees on average, just to untangle the title. It's a costly issue for families because they're losing or at risk of losing generational wealth. It's a costly issue for the city of Philadelphia because that means that's a potential of displacement that opens the door for other not so good actors. We'll talk about that as well. But one of the things that I wanted to start with is when you talk with families about estate planning, what is the biggest misunderstanding you hear and how does it affect them down the road?
Okay. One of the biggest misunderstandings that I see is that people think that everything is going to be all right. They don't have to do anything. Or I get the situation, well, my children will know what to do. And I always start out by saying, okay, while you're going celebrating life, okay, they're going to be fighting in the middle of the street over what to do. So it's all about planning. It's all about planning, sitting down, saying, this is what I want to happen. This is what will happen. And then everything moves smoothly. And I've been doing this, Abraham, for 47 years now.
Oh, you have a little bit more experience.
And unfortunately, okay, most of the people don't want to talk about this. I did one seminar and the person said, well, I don't want to talk about estate planning. I said, why? I said, you need to talk about it. He said, no, because when you talk about wills, when you talk about trust, that means you're going to die. I said, but we're all going to die. But die planned. That's what I said. Put it together. Okay. Think about it. Okay. Because you want to make it easier for those who follow you. And that's what people don't think about. They basically think, well, everything's going to be all right because I planned. No, you planned for you.
Yeah.
You don't plan for when you're gone. And that's why I really put a lot of work into this.
And you touch into one of my next questions, which is if someone is just starting to think about passing down a home or assets, what are the essential documents they absolutely need
Okay.
and why?
I always start out by saying you need to have your deed.
Yeah.
If there's a mortgage on the property, you need to have that information. And I also said, okay, if you're thinking about it, write it down while you're thinking about it. Okay, think about what you want done. You can always change it later. It's always better when you go to somebody and say, this is what I want to do, and then you ask the question, can I do it, or how can it be done?
Yeah.
Okay, most people want to sit down and say, you tell me what you want me to do. And I tell them, I said, no, what do you want to do? And I'll just tell you how to do it. That's it. Let them start thinking about it. I always tell people, no, I said, what do you want to say in your will? Write it down. What do you want to say in your trust? Write it down. Then we'll talk about it. I get them to start thinking about it. Then I sit down with them.
Yeah,
And
that's our friends of the of an organization called Let's See If We Can Help.
Yes.
Actually, have a. I'm sure you know them.
Yes, yes.
oh yeah, you
I've
know
done a
that's how we
workshop
were
for them.
connected.
Yes.
Yes, they have a toolkit that they design where they tell people. People can download the forms,
Yes.
and they can actually write down step by step some of what they're thinking, and that helps folks organize their thoughts around their estate. And I'm gonna open a parenthesis and say, estate can be a house,
Yes.
because a lot of folks think when I say estate, they can think people. Some of us can think that it's all of these things, but estate can be simply a house.
A house. You know, and I make it clear to people, I said, estates can be bank accounts. It can be insurance policies. I said, the goal is planning ahead. And I always share this with them because when Let's See If We Can Help started, they brought me on to do some of the workshops. I drafted sample wills, trust, so that they can see. And I had to share with people, I said, now, one thing about inheritance, okay, if you want to leave something to someone, leave it to them as a beneficiary, because then there's no inheritance taxes. I said, if you add their name onto it, they're going to pay inheritance taxes. That's the planning part about it. And a lot of people are saying, well, I didn't know that. And I always say this because you didn't ask. I said, we need to get people to ask questions. What should I do? How should I do it? So it's been good.
It's important for people to have these conversations. And we know that a lot of people are avoiding planning because it feels uncomfortable. I always use the example that I'm Mexican and we are going as far as dressing up as skeletons. But when we talk about that, we're like, that's bad juju. That we don't feel, some of us cannot feel as comfortable having those conversations. So what is a good step for families who find the topic overwhelming and sensitive?
I like to give examples and like to share with them. First thing I said, do you have insurance policies? Yes. I said, why? Because in case I'm gone, I want to make sure. I said, okay, then why not have a will? Why not have a trust? And they look at me like, well, if I have I said, no, an insurance policy only covers insurance. Okay, it doesn't cover what you want done. I said, you can tie it all together into an estate planning package, okay, that makes everything flow. And that's what they don't realize. You want it to flow to make it easier on those left behind.
I like the word you just used, flow. It has to have flow. So let's get a little bit more granular with estate planning and the other side of what happens when you don't plan, when you leave. Instead of living a legacy, you leave problems, folks.
Yes,
and I'm going to put myself on that bucket because unfortunately, when both my parents died, they didn't leave a will. They didn't have a will. My mom had a will. My father, fortunately, did not have enough time to draft a will. So I'm talking about years of different administrative situations that we had to go through in order for us to unlock some of the potential that the state has, right? And for me, living in the States and my family being in Mexico, different countries, similar issues. This is not exclusive. And I'm going to say this with a lot of love and respect for everyone who's involved with this business. But this is not exclusive to low-income families. It happens to people who are more affluent as well. This is not exclusive of urban communities. It happens across all communities, and also rural communities are also very afflicted by that issue. It's not exclusive to African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, white people, across all races, across all sectors. We know that, and I recently learned some disturbing historical facts about why. We know that there is a distrust that appears more prevails within some communities, like the African American community and the Hispanic community and the Asian community. Can you tell us about a little bit of what your take is on that?
I think a lot of it stems from, especially in the African American community, is this. I just want to leave everything to my family.
Yeah.
Okay, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay, because if you don't put it in writing, and if you don't designate, what happens is, by time you leave, you may have 5,000 families who have 5,000 heirs, who have 5,000. So what happens, it becomes heir property, which makes it tangled. That is the major thing by tangled properties. Okay.
Yeah.
Some of it is illegal. I had a case where I had to represent a church because somebody stole one of the properties, then sold it to somebody else. And so I had to file a quiet title action. But a lot of it is, I just want to keep it in the family. So if I don't put it in writing, or if I don't get this person involved, it'll always be in the family. I had a case recently where somebody came to me and I asked them this question. I said, do you know all the heirs? They said, well, no. I said, how many heirs do you think? We don't know. I said, well, how many are living that you do know? They said 300. I said, now how many have died that you don't know? I get them to think about this. And that's when it comes to,
For people who have never heard the term of tangled title, and can you break down a little bit of what is heirs property means in real life terms?
Most of the properties in Philadelphia, and I guarantee most of that 10,000 is for people who didn't leave wills,
Yeah.
or people who had wills and didn't update their wills. Okay, that causes
we see that
tangled
too,
property.
yes.
And it's tangled because if you don't know all the heirs, you can never untangle that property.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you start going around checking, well, how do I find heirs? How many heirs live out of the country now? How many heirs? And there's no way to know that, because if somebody does a will, and say they do a will, they're 30 years old, okay? They live to be 80. What has changed in those 50 years? And I always tell people, you should examine your will, your trust, at least every 2 to 5 years.
Every 2 to
2 to
5 years.
Okay. And you don't have to always write a new will. You can do what we call a codicil, which adds to the original will.
Yeah.
But you want to really, really be very careful how you do wills. Tangled properties also ties in with the way you have deeds prepared. A lot of people will leave property through a deed saying that basically right of survivorship, which means that whoever dies first, the property automatically goes to the second person. And I gave a seminar once, and the person came in, and the person said, well, I don't need to attend the seminar. I said, why is that? And the person said, because my son's name is on all my properties. I said, okay, that's good, that's good. And I said, is it by right of survivorship? And the person said, yes. I said, okay. I said, is your son married? And the person said, why? I said, because if he dies first, his property goes to his wife and not back to you. And the person started thinking, I didn't know that. I said, because you didn't ask.
Yeah.
I said, so you got to be sure that however you prepare, not just wills, but even deeds, you got to make sure that you're protecting what you want to protect.
And you're touching on something very important, which is, I don't mean to mischaracterize what we are trying to do here, which is educating the community. I leave this process in the hands of the experts, the legal experts, and the people who are authorized to have those conversations. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There are a lot of back office conversations, barbershop conversations about how salon conversations about how some of this plays out. I'm going to emphasize that people should connect with professionals. The city of Philadelphia has some programs, some funding. I think that's part of the reason why you're also being on the road with some of our elected officials who deeply care about this. And they can dedicate through some organizations like Community Legal Services or Philly VIP, they can dedicate some resources to assist some folks. But we know that capacity-wise, those organizations may not at all times have enough staff, enough capacity to deal with the issue of
issues.
10,000 families plus the new families who want to draft a will. So you are in the category of professionals outside of that sphere, that immediate sphere, but you have many years of experience doing this. You have your background also of working with the housing counseling community. So I know that you put a little bit on your housing counselor hat, and you have dedicated time and efforts to solve this issue with many families. Can you tell us a little bit of what is the process when if someone connects with you or a legal professionals? You mentioned the list that has to be put together. What are some of the other actions that you take to help families put together a will?
One of the things I do when people come to me, I say, why do you want to do what you want to do?
Yes.
Because I want to hear, well, somebody told me. Well, who told you? Why did they? No, what do you want to do? For example, a lot of times I get questions, well, I want to add so-and-so to my deed. I say, why? They said, well, because, they're a child and I want to add them to my deed. So I say, okay, now are you getting some of the benefits from the city, like senior citizen discounts and loop? And I said, if you add them,
Yeah.
you will be removed.
Yeah.
And you have to reapply. And they're like, oh. I said, so think about it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't add your child, but just think about what happens, And then I had a situation recently where someone came to me and said, I added my son to my deed years ago, but I want to take him off now. I said, well, in order to take him off, he has to agree. And the person looked at me and said, I put them on. I said, no, you put them on, but now you have to get their agreement to take them off. Yeah. And these are the things that they don't ask in advance. You should ask, okay, should I add somebody to my deed? And I'll say, well, here's what happened if you do. Okay, they become a joint owner of your property.
Sharing responsibilities.
Right. So if you get angry and you want them off and they say no, okay, then you might get involved with collection.
You tapped into something very important, which is the city has some amazing programs that help people. I want to remind everyone, for anyone who's watching outside Philadelphia, Philadelphia is very unique in that sense that they have those programs like Loop, like the homestead exemption, like other kinds of rebates, low income tax freeze, etc. And yes, when someone else is there, you open the door for some challenges. But I'm going to touch on one very specific that we see on our first-time home buyers program. People have been added to deeds when they were kids.
Kids, yes.
And they don't know that they were added to mom, dad's, grandma, grandpa, uncle deed. And then we're trying to negotiate down payment assistance for them through the city of Philadelphia or some other programs. And guess what? Turns out that they are not first-time home buyers.
That's right.
They own a home. Luckily, the city of Philadelphia has been very flexible in some of the cases with us, and they have worked with us. They've shown the disposition to work with us. In other cases, some folks in the lending community cannot be as flexible or as understanding. HUD has a very clear definition of what a first-time home buyer is. So it's not a warning, but I do want to make everyone aware, as you said, by adding someone to a deed, not only you're going to need their authorization to be removed, but also you may be making that person run out of some opportunities that are available to them as first-time home buyers.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that is not only once that I've seen that. I've seen that happening multiple times, and the issues can be complicated depending on the situation.
And on that same point, Abraham, I'm glad you mentioned this, and I share this with a lot of people. If you have a mortgage on a property and you add somebody's name to the deed without the approval of the mortgage company, you may have violated that mortgage.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, I didn't know that. I said, because technically they can declare a default and move. So I said, you got to be careful. Before you do anything, you need to ask somebody.
It is a collateralization of the house. And another, as housing counselors, and we share that that spirit about in terms of foreclosure prevention. We often encounter these cases on the foreclosure prevention side when unfortunately someone passes and now the survivors are trying to, the surviving family is trying to figure out what to do with the property. They're trying to assume the mortgage or whatnot, but then there turns out that there isn't a will. So can you tell us a little bit about what happens when there isn't a will, the so-called probate process? It's time consuming, we know that.
It's time consuming. It also really, once you start probate, then that controls the entire process. Doing new deeds, okay, dealing with mortgage companies, because now it's under probate jurisdiction. So you got to follow the probate laws to make sure everything is going to coincide. So it can really cause some confusion.
And Register of Wills here in Philadelphia has been very vocal about tangled titles and wills and this issue. And we're talking to them about probate fees and the other stuff. There are some administrative steps that people need to take. There are some fees that they're going to have to pay. All of these that can be avoided if people are doing estate planning.
Yes.
So what kinds of challenges, legal, financial, or even emotional, do families face once a title becomes tangled or the property becomes heirs property?
One of the roughest challenges that I see is when families have to go against each other. That can never be resolved until, probate court gets involved. And sometimes it's never going to turn out the way everybody wants it to turn out. That's a problem. Plus, it's very costly, because both sides may need to hire attorneys, and you can't resolve the issues. And if it goes to the probate court, basically the court says, no, we have the final say-so now, So we're going to decide what's going to be right, and if you disagree, you can appeal it. More money.
Yeah, it ends up in the hands of the estate to make a determination about a familial asset and generational wealth, family wealth. I mean, those are words that I hear a lot of people using right now. Let's create wealth. Let's preserve wealth. Estate planning, the easiest way to preserve family wealth. If someone discovers their home is tied up in a tangled title, what are the first practical steps they should take?
They really need to actually consult with somebody who knows about, like a title insurance company. Say, can I get a title review of this? The DA's office now has a special unit that works with seniors who have issues, regarding tangled title. But questions is, have somebody look at it. If you really feel that there's an issue, let somebody else look at it to find out for sure. Ask some questions.
But very important, and I'm going to emphasize that, this is an issue that needs to be looked at by a professional.
Somebody who knows
someone who knows what they're doing. Foreclosure prevention, again, we are rushing through the process. Literally, someone is losing a house. We're having to do probate, and we have the support of our friends at Community Legal Services who are providing guidance for that. We're lucky in that way. But then sometimes we run into some walls because it's a process that has some legal ramifications, repercussions, and people need to be aware of that. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
I really value you as a good friend for many years.
Thank you.
As a supporter of the Urban League movement, as a community advocate. Is there something else that you think the community needs to know about heirs property, tangled titles, estate planning?
One of the things that I think the community should do is start, putting on these. I'm working with some churches now, and they're asking me to come and do webinars or to put presentations together. I said, you got to reach people, before these things happen.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to, and I hate saying this, you have to shock them into saying, I shouldn't have done this. What do I do now? And the best way is to have them come out to churches and community events. Let's see if we can help. That's what they're doing.
Yes.
We've actually started doing some workshops at funeral homes.
Wow.
Because a lot of times they will wait till it gets to a time for a funeral and start asking these questions. And some of the funeral homes don't know the answers. So present them in advance, and that way people will start saying, okay, I should do this, or I shouldn't do that.
So there is no excuse. People should know that there is a range of information and resources that are available to them, but they need to talk about it.
That's right.
That's what I'm hearing. They need to be proactive, consult with the professionals. What I alluded to a little bit earlier is there's a tradition in our communities because of some historical events like race covenants that precluded some groups from accessing the benefits of owning a home or inheriting a home. Specifically, the African American Jewish community, the Asian community have gone through different cycles of that. And even though race covenants are illegal since the 40s, we're still seeing to this day the ramifications and the consequences of that, where people in our communities who did not grow being exposed to some of that information. So I'm glad to hear that you are out there, boots on the ground in the community, fighting these kinds of issues for us, for the Urban League of Greater Philadelphia. Of course, this is an issue that we are very concerned about, that we want to educate the community about. We are also in partnership with Let's See If We Can Help, Community Legal Services, Philadelphia Legal Assistance, Philly VIP, the Senior Law Center, the Legal Clinic for the Disabled at this point. And then, of course, you. You are a great advocate. And then we'll talk more about how we're going to continue collaborating. Yes. So I want to thank everyone for watching this video. Again, if you want to get more resources, more knowledge about this and other issues, make sure to check the offer through our YouTube channel. Navigate to some of these videos that might be shown in here. Reverend, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your being here, and thank you for watching.